So hi everyone. First, I would like to thank the organizers for the invitation. I'm really happy and honored participating to this very nice initiative you had with the seminars. So yeah, Sasha asked me to give a talk on the mid-Norwegian margin, focusing on the along strike segmentation we have up there. So I will try to do my best with that. First, I will begin very general, trying to introduce you to the rift system. Then I will show you some data and what we can do with this data. With the data, we will see that, yes, that system is segmented. We do have changes. And then I would like to open a discussion on the parameters that may be responsible for that segmentation. So that's the global plan. So here is where we are going to stay. So we are Northeast Atlantic, here with mid-Norway. So a closer look. So here you have Norway, Iceland, Northeast Greenland. This is the mid-Norwegian margin we have here. You already see that it is segmented. We are going today to talk about these two segments we have here, Møre and Vøring. The conjugate is Northeast Greenland with also Jan Mayen, a microcontinent that we have in the middle here. What is interesting with that system is that it has a very long tectonic history. As you see, it spans quite a huge deal of the time scale. I could even have had times before Devonian, because actually the tectonic history begins with an orogeny that we have here with a continental collision with the Caledonites that you build here at Silurian time. Then you do the collapse of the orogeny, and that at one stage we don't really know when, how, where for the full system. You begin your rift phase, and you see the rift phase is really long. It has distinct phases of deformation, but also some phases of tectonic pose that are also very important for the geometries. Yep. And then you see it spans something like 200 to 150 million years before we reach the breakup at Cenozoic time. So you see we have a lot of time to play with our parameters to influence the geometries and build that segmentation we have here. So here we have a closer look, and we are going to see what the data can look like in that system. So we are really lucky there because we have access to a huge data set of seismic reflection profiles, so we can do a lot of mapping. So this is what the profiles can look like, but as always on PowerPoint, it is not that nice, or at least I don't know how to put that in a nice way. But this is yeah, what it looks like. You have an idea. And here is what you can do with this data. So this is a mapping done by Pertaye Osmundsen. And you see on this data, you can already map quite a lot of things, a lot of stratigraphic geometries that are quite interesting. You can map also a lot of volcanics, some magmatic intrusions, and so on. You can map fault systems, fault families. If you're lucky, you can even map some fault planes. And you see, you can already begin to delineate the main structural domains like that. We are also lucky there because we have a lot of wells. So that's very helpful because it gives a robust constraints on the lithologies and the edges of these things you have there. The counterpart is that these wells are quite shallow. So that means that as for everywhere else in the world, we still have a lot of question marks on the lithologies at depth, and it is still rather unconstrained. So of course, at that stage, once you've mapped your observations, once you want to enter the interpretation mode, you can also play with geophysical methods and potential field modeling, notably. The thing with these methods is that they are not conclusive, they are non-unique, so it is also a bit difficult. So with Pertaye, my co-author, we don't like to stay on only one interpretation. We don't like to only go in one direction. So what we like to do is to try to span the range of options you have with your data set. So what we do is that we try to play, for example, with the n-member cases you can have with your geophysical modeling, and try also to investigate all the scenarios you can have in between. For example, in that case, for that line in southern Møre, you can play with a scenario saying that you have a lot of continental crust in your distal margin. So this is that case. The opposite option would be that one, for example, where you decide for any reason, that you got rid of your crust quite rapidly. You do your neck and you exhume your mantle, and then the distal margin is floored by exhumed mantle. And then if you don't want to be that extreme, you can also investigate some cases in between, some intermediate options where, yeah, you do your thinning, your crustal thinning, and you have some remnants of continental crust in the distal margin in the form of thin layers or alloctones and so on. So you see, you can play that game for each profile all the way through your margin. This is the case, for example, for the profile number 2 in Møre still. So the same, you have that series of major crystal blocks really nicely defined on the seismic. And then in the distal margin, you have something that it is a bit more unconstrained. And there also you can play with your scenarios. The same for the profile we have here at the next segment, here in Vøring. You have that wide proximal domain, that gentle necking of the continental crust, and then you enter the distal domain, where the scenarios can span and options with thick continental crust to exhumed mantle to something more in between, like a compromise between the two end member options. Okay. So if we make the point, we have that mid-Norwegian margin that is showing a Møre segment and a Vøring segment. If we take the intermediate options, because try to avoid being too extreme, we do see already with these options that yes, we do have a segmentation, we do have a change laterally of the main geometries of the margin. So that's it. We do have that segmentation along strike. Now I want to go a bit further to develop a discussion based on that. And I will try to discuss the parameters that can be claimed as influencing these geometries. So there are a lot of people who work on that already, who work on the various parameters that can influence the rifted margin architecture and evolution. Various methods, various sites of study, various people, a lot of studies that are very helpful. I won't go into detail. What I can say is that we can summarize them with these main keywords. We know that temperature is influencing the rifting evolution, the rheology, the layers you put in your system, also the geometrical organization of your layers. We know that the temporal factors also have a lot of influence, notably the extension rates and the variations of these rates. The opening geometry, the obliquity also has a huge influence. The inheritance, of course, but also the mantle status and the presence of melts or not. We also know that these parameters can have huge feedback effects between them. So that also add a certain level of complexity to the equation. So I'm not going to discuss this today. What I'm going to do is that I will try to add 2 more items on that list. I would like to discuss the breakaway complexes and to add something under that inheritance umbrella, dealing with the orogen variability. And I will show you that. So the breakaway complexes first. What are these? These are specific fault systems you have in your rifted margin. These are the faults that are really shaping your structural domain. They are the ones that are bordering the structural domain you have in your rifted margin. This is why we call them the proximal, the inner necking, or outer necking breakaway complexes. What is interesting with these faults is that you can begin to map them in your data set, and at one stage you will realize that these faults, they can change their geometry along strike. And it is something very important because some of them, for example, they will drastically change these geometries. And actually, it is not only the geometry that is changing, it is also the tectonic role of the fault that is changing laterally. For example, you can have a case where you are beginning to map a fault that is playing the role of inner necking at one stage in your rift system. That means that it is a major fault, the ones that is really responsible of the neck of your crust. And you can try to follow it laterally in your data set, and you will realize that at one stage, that fault can evolve into a standard normal fault that has no major tectonic role. And the same with other fault systems. You can follow them laterally, and they can change that tectonic role. And with Perterier, we think that this lateral change may help explaining that segmentation that you create along strike with your margin. So that was the first point I wanted to highlight there. The second point is dealing with the inheritance. You remember we said that the tectonic history of the mid-Norwegian system is very long and quite complex. And before the beginning of rifting, we know that we have tectonic events before that are really major tectonic events, including an orogeny and a collapse phase. And of course, we would like to know how far the geometries you develop down there can influence your rifting evolution afterwards. And to investigate these geometries, this is the proximal domain you have to go and check, because this is the domain of the margin where these geometries may be safeguarded. So this is what we did. We went back to our data set and tried to understand what type of architecture we were seeing in this proximal domain. This is an example coming from, you see there, this is the proximal domain of the Vøring segment we have already seen before. So here we are on the Trøndelag platform. Gwenn, and you see, yes?
10 minutes are over. You have 3 to 5 minutes more. Just
okay. I'll do my best. So rapidly, what you see there is that you don't have that kind of geometries. You see that immediately. You have geometries that are far more complex with high level of deformations. So what we see is these are really typical geometries we have there: core complexes, shear zones, large-scale detachment folds, and thin basement. So you see it is really at the opposite side than what that conceptual approach anticipated. So this is why we changed our mind, and we understood that here in the proximal domain, we have to deal with some geometries that are new to us. And these geometries, we think they belong to a new phase of deformation that we call the reactivation phase, that we didn't understand that was there before. And we think this is the link between the collapse and the beginning of rifting. And based on that, we thought that it could be interesting investigating how this phase of deformation evolve in time and space, and how far the orogen that you can have at the beginning of your history can influence the building of your rifted margin at the end. Okay, so these are from a work done by Loïc Fourel, who was a postdoc who worked at the NGU under the supervision of Susan Bitter. And Loïc did a huge work trying to modelize that evolution. He created models with first an orogen, and then began to extend that orogen and see what type of geometries we can develop in the rifted margin. So the idea is really that one, is that you can create your rifted margin based on a standard homogeneous model, really homogeneous layering, no anisotropies, standard parameters, low velocity. You can already create quite nice geometries that are really that really look like what we have offshore. But if you add an orogen in your modeling, actually you add a level of complexities to the geometries you develop that is really interesting. And that is really pertinent because it is an excellent approximation of what we see offshore, but also onshore. And to me, it was completely new. So why do I tell you that now? I tell you that because Loïc also worked a lot on all the parameters that influence the orogeny and the rifting evolution. All the standard parameters, of course, but he also focused his attention on the parameters dealing with the orogeny, notably the amount of convergence. And that was really interesting. And there, for example, I picked 2 examples in his catalog of numerical modeling. These 2 are exactly the same parameters all the way through, except one. The amount of convergence he put at the beginning to build the orogen. So on the left, you see 150, on the right, only 50. And you see at the end, even though there is only that parameter that changed, the geometries in your final rifted margin are extremely different. Very short, abrupt necking margin there, much wider, very nice distal basin there in that case. And you see, so I'm not saying that, of course, I'm not saying that that amount of convergence can be compared to the Caledonites. This is not what I'm doing. It's unrealistic. What I'm saying there is that maybe there is something there that we need to be investigated further. We see with this example that the structuration of the orogen by itself before the beginning of rifting can also have an impact on the margin you create afterwards, even if it is 200 million years afterwards. And that's my conclusion. So yes, I come back. The mid-Norwegian system, as you asked, Sasha, yes, it is segmented. We do have segments. The geometries are changing laterally. Why is that so? We don't really know why. We know based on the work of many colleagues that we have a long series of parameters that can be claimed as responsible of that segmentation. We also know that we have feedback effects. What I wanted to add today on that list is just to open a discussion on the possibility of two more items. The one with the breakaway complexes, so the tectonic evolution of these breakaway complexes we have in the rifted margin, and also the pre-rift setting with the geometries of the orogen, taking into account that, yes, we begin our rifting on an orogen, but that orogen by itself has its own variability, lateral variability that can also influence the segmentation. And that's it. Thanks.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Gwen.
Thanks.
There's time for one or two quick questions. If you have one, just type Q in the chat or raise your hand. There's people applauding, but no question yet. I would have a quick one. Can you go one slide back?
Yes.
In the upper right corner, you show nicely how your faults can change their meaning in the overall setting. What's the wavelength on the third dimension? How long is this transition in terms of like spatial extent?
It can be, yeah, as always, the answer will be, it can be all scale. What we do see on the Norwegian margin is that I would say that it is in something like 50 to 100 kilometers. You really define your segments in that corridor. But it can be extremely short. For example, we also saw that already on the Iberia margin with the evolution along strike of exactly the same type of geometries. And there it is even shorter because it is in something like, if I remember well, it was 12 kilometers between the two profiles that were showing that evolution.
Mm-hmm. Marta, you have a question?
Yeah, sorry not to show myself. It's not the best day for you to see me. No, I have been a little bit sick. My question is about how you do the orogen and how does the structural variability of that orogen influence the evolution of your rift. So if you show the initial models, yeah, you have, I think that's the blues here on the left-hand side. That is a strain rate?
Yes, you have accumulated strain. Okay. In blue colors, it's really to show the accumulation of the deformation, and in red colors, the active deformation. Okay,
and okay, so it accumulates. I see that now.
Right.
It accumulates in between the naps of your orogen.
Yes, yeah, so you have the nap there with the thrust and all that, and you reuse and rotate your thrusts during the collapse and the further rifting phases. Okay. It's really interesting, and Loic did a huge work with that. I know it is not published yet, but yeah, I mean, his work was really impressive, and yeah, it was excellent. How we initiated the orogen, that was with a seed, as always.
Okay. Well, that was my question.
And depending on all the parameters, yeah, of course, as you know, you change the geometries, you change the number of thrusts, and so on.
Yeah, and I have a comment as for the initial core complexes.
Yeah.
So that's if you have a weak enough lower crust, even without this structural complexity, you start your rift with core complexes. We do see this in models without that, detailed structural variability.
Yeah.
So you go from the core complex to wide to sequential or narrow afterwards.
But thanks also to the onshore observations done in southwest Norway, for example, we begin to understand that really that combination of the core complex, the detachment fault, and the basement thinning, it is really something that is really far more common than what we used to think. We see it in most of the basement domains. Yeah.
Yeah, but probably we don't see it in West Iberia because what we had at the start was not the same.
Yeah, exactly.